tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So this is really the kind of practice or pragmatic oriented part 2 of last week's conversation about the third noble truth, which says that with the cessation of that very same grasping, second noble truth, then that suffering also ceases. First noble truth, suffering. Second noble truth, grasping, the cause of suffering. Third truth, cessation. The end of grasping means the end of suffering. And so we have this thing we call letting go. And it sounds like a verb, right? It sounds like a thing you do. In some ways it is, right? And in some ways I think that grammatically we can get caught up in the verbness of let go and think it's something that we can do on purpose. There's a connection in practice, as we've been just discussing. There's a connection between some different aspects of how we settle both the heart, the mind, and the body in practice. So relaxing, right, or calming the body, has a kind of letting go of muscular tension. And it's one of the most concrete examples of letting go as an active moment-to-moment process. When you bring your attention to the body and you come into contact with a tension pattern, right? I feel my tension patterns, very often, in the neck and shoulders. Those are harder to release. But like there's one that's relatively easy to release, but then it comes back quickly, which is in the corners of the jaw. So I'll sometimes feel, and I often feel this like when let's say I felt it right now in the meditation, I feel sometimes when I'm teaching, because when we're talking, I'll have what I sometimes call the social mask on. I'm smiling a little, I like seeing you, we're talking. There's a kind of shape in the face. And even when I'm at rest, just doing whatever, there's a little shape in the face. And then I'll come into meditation and I'll do my little, I'm starting off relaxing, calming, sweeping down, relax around the eyes, relax around the jaw. And almost always when I get to the jaw, there's like, I encounter what feels like the neutral position of my mouth and jaw. You can do it right now as I'm talking. I'm doing it as I talk. It's hard to talk and do it at the same time. And I'll contact it, and then I'll say, let go or relax. And there's a kind of spreading, softening. And it's almost like until I give the instruction to relax, the muscular pattern that's there, creating the shape of the semi-smiling social mask resting face, is not calling attention to itself. It is a palpable sensation if I tune into it. But if I don't tune into it, it just feels natural, right? I wear the mask a lot. I'm talking with people, right? We have pejorative terms in our culture for someone's resting face when they're not slightly smiling at you. And so in meditation, you can do this. You can contact your face, suggest relaxation, and it'll soften. And often I can do this a couple times in a meditation. I'll get like 10 minutes in, and I'll notice. Often when I'm guiding a meditation, this will happen right after I finish speaking. I come out of the I'm giving instructions mode and I go into now I'm just meditating for myself mode, and there will be a whole extra dropping in my face. Don't go back to videos and look for it, but you'll see it if you do, right? You'll see it in yourself if you do too, right? If you that like once it's really not being used and I give the instruction, let go, there's very often this palpable like, oh, and the mask shape comes forward in consciousness and then is able to release, and there's just a dropping. And so this can happen with, lots of kinds of muscular tension. But when patterns are very deep, particularly, and I'll keep going with the body as the example for a minute here, particularly with deep bodily patterns like postural patterns, old repetitive use patterns, they're not so easy to relax. So I have a tightness pattern in my forearms that's like writing, typing, piano playing, violin playing, so many things that the forearms have done. And when I tune into it, I can feel the tension there in the musculature. But unlike at the jaw, when I tune into it, if I say, okay, relax now, nothing. It's like it's baked in, and I have to get really, really, really still. And only in very, very still released states can I feel like the forearm and wrist really release. And so we can think of letting go as an active instruction, as a kind of, you can't make something let go, because really what you're doing is you're taking away the effort of maintaining a muscular shape. You can suggest that something release, and you can kind of give the instruction, relax, relax, relax. And sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't. And that really depends on the depth of the pattern. Sometimes we need external help to help it to relax. So like my partners and essentially our favorite date night ever, and we do it, it's our most common date night also, two tired parents, is we go to this place where we can get massages together. And so we just get a doubles massage, and then we go out to dinner, or go for a walk or something. And very, very somatically oriented and non-entertainment oriented parents. We're like, movie? Let's get a massage, so that's us. You get some external help to work there. But as an intention, letting go is going to mean coming into contact with a tension pattern and seeing if we can untangle the continual effortful impulses that are maintaining that pattern, right? So like to maintain the social mask in the face requires a kind of constant re-engaging of it. And it's so unconscious that you probably don't notice it. But as soon as you bring your attention to it, you may be able to drop it. And so if this is our model, I'll propose that it's similar in the heart-mind as it is in the body. So we come into relationship as we practice with things as they are and things as they have come to be, things that they have been conditioned into. And what we find is shapes, patterns of action, patterns of muscularity, patterns of thought, of course, concept, worldview, emotional patterns that have solidified into a certain form over the course of our lives, maybe over the course of many generations, maybe through the endless streams of ancestry and that have brought us here, maybe through the endless streams of karma, that have brought us into this lifetime. And you come into contact with a pattern as it is, right? Whatever state it's in when your mindfulness encounters it. And once we become aware of something, only once we become aware of something can we make a choice in relation to it. And that choice can be, isn't always, but can be the choice to let go. To let go is a kind of intention that we bring. It's a kind of desire, a desire for the good, for non-suffering, for release, for cessation, that we bring to a pattern when we find it. in our system. And so if I find a pattern that's, not a muscular pattern, but like an emotional or an emotion and thought pattern that's not so helpful. So, one I have found is like defensiveness in relation to critique. So if I'm in some situation and I think someone is upset with what I've been doing or saying or somehow is critical of something, I'll notice that that although my practice, my Dharma practice says, you know, uh, the Buddha would say, be a monk who's easily admonished. So be a person who accepts feedback graciously and learns from it. That's the ideal. And I encounter when critique is coming my way, I encounter the pattern that feels very ancient. And I've done my therapy. I know how far back it goes. Um, and I've done my social location and privilege and history of patriarchy um, learning as well. So I know how far back it goes, not just in my body and narrative, but perhaps very, very far back, entwined in systems of oppression, systems of power, systems of how patriarchy works, how other kinds of oppression work, uh, where I sit closer or further away from the center of power in various ways. Right? You want to learn about your patterns, whatever they are. So I encounter this pattern. Here comes critique, and here comes a kind of defense, and I want to, I can feel how the pattern is to want to redirect their critique away from myself, right? I notice thoughts coming up of like, how could I shift the narrative so it's not entirely my fault? Or how could I, you know, um, how could I give the right answer in this moment that may or may not be the most vulnerable or authentic or even skillful, but that will redirect the force of the critique away from the center of my being? So that's an old pattern. So when I encounter that pattern, if I have my mindfulness awake, right, one of the things that will happen first is I'll pause before reacting, right? And mindfulness is really the only way to pause before reacting, right? Because the reaction is part of the pattern, right? That's how the pattern has gotten so solidified, is that I've not only felt the impulse, let's say, to defend, but I've acted on that. I've spoken from that many times. And um, and to make it kind of worse, the more I've been successful at that reactivity, the deeper the pattern, right? If I've avoided the blow lots of times skillfully, that's going to feel good to my nervous system, even if I don't really like that I do that. In this way, it's actually more helpful to fail at your defensive strategies in an appropriate context where you're liable to still be safe and learn. So be vulnerable with trustworthy people, basically, um, than succeed. So the first thing to notice is you notice the pattern which comes up as habits, as impulses of protection. That the impulse is really the craving part, right? So there's an impulse, there's a wanting of something, and then the clinging part is the active, like doing something to in reactivity. Both of those are the pattern, and then the deeper pattern is the kind of identity that collects around that. The like, I must always be seen as right, or strong, or sensitive, or whatever. I must be respected, or think I'm being respected, or whatever it is. Right? So I encounter the pattern. I pause because there's mindfulness. So the first thing I need to do is pause. And in that pause, I'm pausing because mindfulness has said pattern, right? And the technical description of this would be, I become mindful of sankhara, basically. Or if I'm looking at all of the aggregates, I'm probably mindful of Vedana, like, ooh, this is unpleasant, right? Somebody has said, hey, can we talk about that thing that happened? Unpleasant, you know? And then I perceive, right? Third aggregate. I told you this was not going to get too theoretical. I'll stop myself. I perceive, third aggregate, what's happening. And I might be wrong, right? So I perceive that someone's tone has gotten a little brittle. Am I right that it's about me and critique is coming? Maybe not. Maybe they didn't sleep so well and their kid is sick and, their breakfast didn't sit so well. Like, you don't know what's up for somebody, but you perceive and you name something that's happening. Um, but the main thing that you see when you're observing a pattern that's causing suffering is you're seeing the sankhara. You're seeing the structure that is coming together based on these conditions. So you see the pattern. Mindfulness says, oh, here's that thing. Here's like criticism that's going to be reacted to with defense. Pause. I go, okay, wait. Now what? And what I want, whenever I encounter a pattern that is giving rise to suffering. So anytime you encounter the second noble truth in action, here is craving and it's causing suffering, first noble truth. Anytime you see that in real time, the response is, what do I do skillfully from here? And how do we move toward cessation, toward letting go of this craving? So I see the pattern. I notice it as an old pattern, and I have the discernment and the experience to notice it as unskillful or unwholesome, right? And this is important because you don't want to fall into doubt about, like, what should I do about this pattern? Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this is not a good thing. Part of what mindfulness includes is not just the bare awareness of what's happening. Mindfulness includes an ethical assessment of a thing's wholesomeness or unwholesomeness. So when I see my own defensiveness arising, I don't want to have doubt of, like, you know, maybe this is a healthy boundary, or maybe this is unhealthy defensiveness. I want to understand my pattern clearly enough that I know the difference between those two. And that takes work, and I might be confused, right? But part of mindfulness in its full strength is that it has learned enough about myself, about the Dhamma, right, about other people, to recognize an unskillful pattern when it arises. So I notice, okay, here's defensiveness. I know that it's unskillful, even though and this is, again, tricky. It feels like a necessary boundary in this moment. And you need the discernment to understand exactly what's happening in this moment, because depending on who it is, it could be the same reactivity in you. It likely is, because it's your pattern. But with one person, it's a very appropriate boundary. This is good for safety. With another person, it's going to block intimacy, right? And you say, oh, this is a person to practice vulnerability with. This is a person to have strong boundaries with. And it's on you to know which is which. So that's some discernment. That's some really understanding the different relationships that you're in web with. And the reactivity itself, the part that's not a kind of skillful means response. So to be more specific here about, like, those two examples, responding with a clear boundary is skillful in some circumstances, and responding with vulnerability, and those might be actually happening at the same time, have clear boundaries and be vulnerable, totally can happen at the same time, right? Those are both appropriate responses to conditions. They can both happen without the pattern of reactive defensiveness. So you can do your practice on like, I want to let go of defensiveness and reactivity, no matter what the resulting action is going to be. So I just want to make sure those are separate, right? There's your Dhamma practice, your purification practice, or your own just internal, how do I get happier practice, your letting go practice is really letting go in relation to the unhealthy or unskillful pattern that you find arising in your own heart. It doesn't actually say anything about what you then do. The action you choose, particularly if you've got some good letting go going on, the action you choose could be intentional and it could be whatever's appropriate, right? You can let go of reactivity and make a boundary. You can let go of reactivity and become vulnerable or do lots of other things. So I mostly want to talk about letting go of the pattern. Pause for a second. The pup wants to come in. Here comes the pup. Hello, pup. Don't let go of the puppy. So I notice the pattern, same way as I noticed the muscular pattern in the jaw. And then if I have space to do this, and again, this might have to wait till later if I'm in a charged conversation, but if I can notice the pattern and I can bring my attention to it, then I give the instruction to let go. Oh, what would it be like to just relax this? And I think if the muscular pattern is our model, part of what's happening is I come into contact with the pattern. I understand the pattern. I understand why it's there. You know, I know why I have a pattern of smiling in a certain way when I'm engaging with someone. And then I come into a moment where I understand that this is an appropriate moment to set that down. And it doesn't mean I'm saying that I should maintain, resting meditator face all the time through all my conversations. That would be silly. And my family would think I'm, not happy um, with them or whatever. Um, it's that anytime I don't need the mask, I can put it down, or don't want the mask, or choose to wear a different mask, I can put it down. And in the emotional pattern, here's my reactivity. I come into contact with it and I give the instruction like, oh, this can release. I don't need this right now. And very often, just the pause and the recognition itself is enough to be the seed of the pattern softening. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the pattern says, no, you need me because you're not safe and I am the one that can protect you. You need to be boundaried in this way, or no, that person really is wrong, or this situation really is unfair. All right, pup. Uh, little Tuli does not know where she is. She's come in and out twice tonight. She does. She really wants to come in. She scratches the door. She gets let in. She doesn't get what she wants in here. She goes back out. Um, so much of letting go is not in the final moment of something relaxing, but is in coming into enough intimacy with the pattern that you can, you know, almost like you have to get your attention onto the threads of tension themselves. So I can't relax the face until I actually come into full contact with the web of musculature that's holding the mask on. Right? I can't just say, without contacting somatically the system. I can't just say, relax face. It doesn't actually happen, right? My lips stop moving. Nothing happens in the structural mask. I have to actually contact it a bit slowly. And even then, it kind of goes in a couple of stages. So when I contact the emotional pattern, it doesn't just release right away. You contact it, and you have to contact the emotional muscular threads that are holding the pattern in place. And so, those are going to be like, if I, those might be, if I let go of this pattern, I'll be too vulnerable. I won't be safe. Or I'm just afraid to let go of this pattern and I don't know why. Or I don't want to let this go. This feels like home, or this feels familiar, or this is who I am, or this is what's right, or this is what's just or fair, or just I can't. I just can't let it go. And we want to respect all of the responses that the soma, that the body heart gives to the instruction to let go. Bring the letting go. Say, how do I let this go? Maybe you put a hand on your heart or your belly or wherever. Feels like it could contact the thing that won't let go. And and you come into contact with it. And for the deep patterns, of course, the ones that really are the scaffolding of our sense of self. My sense of self-worth is buttressed by what? By this story, or the feeling of, getting this kind of approval from people, or this kind of lack of criticism or praise, or, having this much success in, work or love or health or power or whatever. Um, we need to come into a kind of intimate contact with the binding threads that create a tension pattern, and know them all, and know each one as a pattern. It's like a fractal of patterns. You know each one as a pattern, know its skillfulness or unskillfulness, be tender with its history in this life, in this body. And with each one, the invitation, oh, can I let go? What would it be like to let this go? You can relax. It's okay. Use whatever language you have for your inner one who holds on. Part of what supports this practice, of course, is not just doing it when it's the intense, painful ones, like a difficult conversation, where the pattern is defensiveness or reactivity or something. Part of what supports knowing how to let go is knowing what it feels like to let go in 1,000 tiny moments. So as we move through the day, look for the little patterns. Look for patterns at all levels, but look for the little ones. Um, I have a pattern of um, a kind of nervous. I'm telling you all my little inner patterns tonight. So here they are. Here's some more. I have a couple of old nervous tics that I do, little obsessive mind things. Both, several of them are connected to my childhood as a classical musician, but in one of them, I have a tiny internal map of multiple octaves of musical notes on all of the joints of my fingers on one hand. That's roughly corresponding with the piano keys, but it goes way beyond that into lots of little joint maneuvers. And so my family will see me doing this, some like super noodly finger thing. And my partner is just like, stop. And I'm like, oh yeah, stop. It uh, it used to be way worse. He brags, but no, it still happens. Um, and what it'll be some it'll be like the externalization of an earworm. Like I've got some melody is playing out in the back of my consciousness, but it's playing out in my fingers. Or even worse, I'll play it with my tongue on the back of my teeth, um, like piano keys. And talk about jaw tension. So, part of my practice of letting go has been to notice each of these things. So the physicalization of the melody, but also to notice the earworm, to notice melodies running through the head, right? And to recognize them as quickly as possible and to stop, right? So that's a little practice. It's like, oh, stop. This is a little bit like therapy for, obsessive compulsive kinds of tics that can get really intense. One of the things you want to do is just notice the seed of it coming again and again and again, and just not learn to not follow that impulse. And it's hard to do, right? But you're letting go in relation to a really stuck pattern, a groove in the record. And you want it to just play through and not get stuck there. So impulse comes, you let it go. Impulse comes, you let it go. Right? In the mind, when you find yourself just replaying, media that you've just seen recently, this is such a thing with parenting because, I find myself in contact with media that I would not have chosen to be in contact with, you know. Um, we'll be listening to some audiobook of whatever story my kid is listening to. So, I just found myself moving through Harry Potter as my kid moved through it. I didn't need to read it again. There it is. And so here I am walking the dog or walking across the house or meditating or whatever, and there's the story, like just kind of being processed, right? The sort of various emotional pings of it being processed in the nervous system, totally natural. When it arises, you see it immediately. Do I need this right now? No. You contact the threads that are holding it in place, which is a kind of, you know, sort of, habitual following of narrative, working out of story in various ways, and be willing to not need to do that. Contact, intimacy, understanding, and only from there then does the relaxing come through. So it's proposing that this is how it works on all levels, physical, emotional, mental, and for both very tiny clingings, just a little earworm because you heard a song yesterday and here it comes again, all the way into like, oh, here's a deep pattern at the core of my sense of being. How can I soften that, over time, coming into intimacy with it again and again and again and again. Come into contact, come into intimacy, and you're just willing to let go. And bit by bit, the muscles soften, right? The tendons soften, the tension patterns. Learn that it's safe enough for them to drop back toward their resting state, right? The non-engaged state, from which they can become engaged as needed and then release again. Pausing there.